When I first stepped onto the deck of the aircraft carrier, the sea smelled as if it was deliberately trying to push everything familiar out of me. The salty wind hit my face, tugging at the collar of my uniform, and the steel trembled under my feet, steady, heavy, like a living creature. I didn't yet understand that this giant would become my home for many months. Not a temporary shelter, but a real home, with its own rules, habits, quirks, and even character. They led me through corridors, narrow as a bottleneck. The walls rang from vibration, and each step echoed in my heels. Duty crew members passed by in a chain, quickly, without words, as if they didn't even notice me, the newcomer. I felt like a tiny bolt about to be fitted into place, and it would start turning along with the huge mechanism. The living quarters turned out to be smaller than I imagined. A locker the size of a shoebox. A bunk, narrow, low, as if intentionally repeating the shape of a coffin. But no one complained. Everyone simply lived as if there couldn't be any other way. I dropped my bag, touched the cold metal with my fingers, and suddenly caught myself feeling something strange, as if the ship was looking back at me, assessing me, deciding whether I would endure or not. And at night, when I lay down for the first time in my rack, it became especially clear. There was no way back. I had to learn to breathe in its rhythm, in time with the engines, in time with the commands, in time with the alarms that could pull you out of your bunk at any moment. And yet, despite the cramped space, the noise, and the constant trembling of the metal, something like confidence appeared in my chest. Maybe acceptance. Maybe a challenge to myself. Or simply the knowledge that a new life was beginning.
The first day on the ship always feels like a test. Quiet, without shouting, but very distinct. You still don't know the routes, don't feel the rhythm, and the ship already demands your attention, like a strict mentor. I woke up at 3 a.m, not from an alarm clock, but because someone in the nearby bunk was noisily pulling on their boots. It's always dark in the compartment, always noisy and always cramped, but no one apologizes, because everyone understands it won't be any different. In the morning, the corridors resembled an anthill that suddenly decided to become orderly. People walked quickly and confidently, each knowing their path, while you, the newcomer, grabbed the handrails so as not to miss another turn. Space on the ship is deceptive. It seems like everything looks the same, but miss just one bulkhead and you'll end up in a different world, among mechanics, pilots, radio operators, or crane operators. Each compartment has its own smells, its own air, its own sounds. My first duty shift passed in a strange mixture of fatigue and tension. The work wasn't difficult, but it demanded constant attention, and that feeling of not a second of relaxation crawled under the skin. You stand, listen to the hum of the deck, look at the instruments, at the people, and suddenly realize, here it is, the real life of the ship. Not parades, not stories in the news, but an endless chain of small tasks without which this whole machine would simply collapse. By lunchtime, I felt like I'd run a marathon. The galley smelled achingly familiar. Warm bread, something like stewed meat with rice, a hint of spices. The food here is always simple but honest. People ate greedily, spoke in short phrases, sometimes laughed, and it was the truest sound of relief, at least some break in the endless working noise. When in the evening I returned to the compartment and tried to lie down in the narrow bunk, the metal trembled beneath my back, and it seemed as if the ship was talking to me. It moved, breathed, hummed, and for the first time I realized we all live inside a giant heart that beats without pauses, without failures. And if you want to survive, you'll have to adjust to its rhythm. After a few days, the ship no longer seemed foreign. No, I still got lost in its corridors like in a giant steel web, but the sense of threat gave way to a strange feeling of belonging, as if it had tested me and, shrugging, decided, fine, stay. Let's see what becomes of you."
But the real test came at night. The first alarm caught me in that rare moment when I was actually starting to fall asleep. The siren tore through the air so sharply that my heart seemed to slam into my ribs. In the darkness, people jumped from their bunks. Someone swore, someone was already pulling on their jacket, someone silently fastening straps as if they had long known this night would be the first. The corridor turned into a stream, fast, precise, almost mechanical. I ran with everyone else, feeling the steel walls vibrating from the mechanisms kicking in. Sleep vanished instantly, as if it had never existed. In its place, a narrow corridor, harsh light, the sound of footsteps, and the sense that everything you'd done before was just a warm-up for real service. On the deck, that familiar smell hung in the air, a mix of fuel, metal, and damp air that only those who've been here at night would recognize. The people around moved quickly, like a single organism. No one said anything unnecessary. And despite the fear, despite the chaos, I felt that strange sense of rightness that would return again and again, as if this was exactly where I was meant to be, among the roaring engines. When the alarm was lifted, the adrenaline lingered for a long time. We returned to the quarters silently, each in their own cocoon of thoughts. Someone exhaled jokingly, someone smiled faintly, someone sat on the edge of their bunk and stared at one point for several minutes. I lay down in my rack and felt the ship humming beneath me. Not loudly, steadily, confidently, as if saying, "Get used to it. This is only the beginning." And I understood. Fatigue here is not the enemy, it's part of the uniform, just as essential as a name tag. You either accept it or something breaks inside. The next morning, I woke up with a clear feeling. Something in me had already begun to change, as if the ship had quietly moved my boundaries, taken a step inside and occupied a place I hadn't even planned to give. Over time, I began to notice how differently people coped with all this pressure. On the ship, you can't be entirely yourself. Too little space, too many duties, too tightly intertwined fates. The ship seems to polish everyone the same way, but each person reacts differently. Some closed off, as if a thin layer of armor appeared between them and the rest of the world. Those guys spoke little, looked past you, answered briefly as if every word cost them energy. They lived in their own compact inner compartment where no one else was allowed. And I understood them. Sometimes it's easier to hide than to let your exhaustion spill out.
Others, on the contrary, became sharp, flaring up like matches. A trifle could throw them off balance. Someone slammed a locker door too loudly, someone took the sink for a minute longer. In ordinary life, it would be nothing. But here, any action echoes through the narrow metal space. If something inside is stretched to the limit, even a small sound can tear it. Sometimes someone couldn't take it anymore, and it was the most honest thing you could see on the ship. A person may stay silent for weeks, hold on, work to exhaustion, and then one ridiculous phrase breaks them, and they go out into the corridor just to walk back and forth, as if trying to put themselves back together step by step. And no one judges them, because everyone knows what it feels like. But amidst all this chaos, something else appeared. A strange, strong, almost inexplicable bond among those who were nearby. Friendship here wasn't built on common interests or similar personalities. No. It was born from shifts, from alarms, from hundreds of small moments when you cover someone's back and they cover yours. It wasn't camaraderie. It was trust, grown not from words, but from actions. I especially remember one evening when we were sitting in a small rest area. Cramped, noisy, but so necessary. The soft hum of the engines served as our music. One guy said his son had been born at home. Another confessed he had lost someone close while at sea. A third simply sat, listened, and nodded from time to time. And in those moments, I suddenly realized we knew more about each other than people living side by side on land for years. Here you can't hide, neither from others' weaknesses nor from your own. And that's exactly why we grew closer. Real service doesn't begin when you get used to the narrow bunk or stop flinching at the siren. It begins when the ship goes on operational duty. On such days, the air changes, becomes denser, heavier, as if an electric charge is dissolved inside it. People speak shorter, move faster, and the ship itself seems to gather into a single knot of will. The readiness signal always sounds the same, short, sharp, like a shot, but each time it turns your body into a tight spring. A minute ago, you could be sitting, leaning against a warm bulkhead, listening to the steady hum of the engines, and then suddenly you jump as if your heart pushed you forward. Your legs find the right corridor on their own, your body remembers the drills, and your thoughts shrink to one. Don't make a mistake.
The deck at such moments is a living organism that breathes differently. Someone gives commands, someone starts the equipment, someone checks the catapults, someone stands watch with a straightened back, ready to leap at the first signal. Everyone moves fast but precisely, like parts of a single mechanism that has no right to malfunction. And in this frantic bustle, there's a strange calm. The world seems to simplify into clear commands, short actions, practiced gestures. For the first time, you feel not just like a person in uniform, but like a part of something enormous and exact. But night alarms are a completely different beast. They yank you out of sleep like a hook. For a few seconds, you don't even understand where you are. A narrow bunk, dim light, swaying, everything blends into one lump. Someone is already pulling on their boots, someone quietly swears. Someone moves so quickly as if they had been working all night just waiting for the signal. The corridor turns into a labyrinth. The walls shake. The ladder flights seem to stretch, and the siren coils inside your skull, keeping you from gathering your thoughts. And yet, it's at night you realize how connected we really are here. No one is left alone. Even if it's dark, even if the alarm is real and not a drill, someone is always nearby. Sometimes we stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting for an order, and you could hear someone's breathing trembling in the darkness. You were trembling too, and then someone's hand would touch your shoulder, briefly, almost unnoticed, but exactly enough, just to say, "We're here." Sometimes that touch was enough for fear to settle like dust after an impact. When after many long months, the day of returning to port finally comes, no one believes it at first. The official order exists, the course is changed, but something inside resists. During the deployment, you grow so used to the endless sea that the thought of land seems almost unreal. Everyone walks around the ship a little faster than usual, as if trying to keep their hands busy, distract their minds, anything to avoid thinking about crossing from one world into another.
But when the smell of land first slips through the salty wind, something happens in your chest that's hard to explain. As if someone carefully opens the invisible seam that kept you held together all these months. People on the deck seem taut like a bowstring. Everyone wants to step ashore, but no one knows what to do with that desire. We lived too long by the ship's rhythm, where every movement is regulated, every minute scheduled, and every space limited by steel. Too long to simply walk out and become who we were before. When the lines are thrown to the pier and the ship is slowly pulled toward the shore, a strange, almost solemn silence settles. No one jokes, no one makes noise. We just stand and watch how the world that was somewhere beyond the horizon now comes right up to us. The gangway hits the concrete with a sound like a full stop at the end of a long story. And then you take a step. The ground under your feet is soft, yielding, laughably unfamiliar. People around are laughing, someone tries to speak loudly with a voice that crocks, someone wipes their eyes with a sleeve, someone walks silently, as if afraid to disturb the fragility of the moment. And almost everyone looks back, at the steel giant that for 9 months was a home, a prison, a trial, and the only constant. I look back too, every time. Because no matter how hard it was inside those walls, no matter how loudly the engines roared, no matter how crushing the exhaustion felt, a part of me always stays there. There where I woke up to the siren, ate warm bread amid the clatter, stood through the alarms, listened to the breathing of my shipmates in the dark. There where we held on to each other because there was no other way.
There, where the enormous steel city in the middle of the ocean became something more than just a ship. And another part of me, inevitably, returns.